What's up everybody and welcome to the Odd Vlog. I've just binge watched the entirety of season 3 of Marvel's What If show and I'm going to do a review of it, break down a few of the episodes, but overall I will just say this. If you want to watch the show, you could literally skip everything up until the final 2 episodes and just watch those, because everything that happens prior to those last 2 is kind of completely irrelevant. And if I'm being honest, in fact the entire series and the whole show is entirely irrelevant to the whole of the MCU. So it's kind of just a big waste of time, but let's get into some details. Now, I will just say I've never been a fan of the What If show. I just find it a little bit tedious. I find that it tends to do way too much character assassination of really beloved characters. And actually it tends to kind of fall back on kind of the B-list of Marvel superheroes. It doesn't really focus on like the main ones. And the stories that they tell are just really convoluted, very watered down, relies way too much on humor and just doesn't deliver in any way, shape or form, apart from 1 or 2 episodes that are actually kind of cool. Overall, I've never been a fan of the show, and season 3 was just a carry on really of what had happened before. So not great, but let's look at a few of the episodes on their own merit. So episode 1, which was called What If the Hulk Fought the Mech Avengers. Now, this is a really misleading title because actually the Hulk doesn't fight anybody. The people that the Mech Avengers are fighting is actually like an offshoot of the Hulk. It's not the Hulk that they're fighting, it's some other weird gamma radiation monster creature thing. So the Hulk isn't fighting the Avengers in any way, shape or form. So it's kind of a little bit weird that they've actually kind of used that title because it's just not true. It's not even what happens. But the whole thing is a little bit weird because the way that the Avengers are, the Mech Avengers, basically it feels like you're watching like an episode of Gundam. It's really very Power Rangers-y in the way that they kind of get in these mech suits that all kind of link up to one another. And there's massive elements of like Godzilla in there as well. So it's hugely inspired by other franchises. It starts out really interesting because it basically swaps out Steve Rogers for Bruce Banner at the beginning of the Winter Soldier when he's like running around in Washington, and Sam kind of, in this case, overtakes Bruce, and it's the same kind of conversation that he has with him as he would do with Steve in the movie. But basically the two of them become good friends, and then in the end they sort of fall out because Bruce turns into the Hulk and scares everybody and blah blah blah. He then goes off, tries to use gamma radiation to get rid of the Hulk, but accidentally creates another one that sort of separates from himself. It's really weird. And then that one that goes off and basically terrorizes the whole world and creates something called the Gamma Wars, which is basically like an end of the world apocalyptic thing. All of the original Avengers kind of die somehow, and you're left with basically like the new Avengers and sort of what's left. And the only way that they can fight these monsters is to build giant robot versions of themselves and this kind of stuff. So that's where it's a bit like Gundam. And it looks that way as well. Like the animation and the style of the robots is just like that. And the suits of each individual superhero can kind of like come together, so it's just like Power Rangers. So, but it's actually kind of cool. It was actually a decent way to start the series. I was just a bit confused by the title. Didn't really like the way that they were using the Winter Soldier opening scene because it's just not original. And then once they kind of went off and started doing all of this thing, it kind of becomes better. Hulk then does appear, and he like is a bigger and even worse version of himself and looks like Godzilla and has the same powers as Godzilla, so it's kind of really inspired by just other stuff. But this is kind of my problem with What If. It's just ripping off other stuff. It doesn't really mean anything. The episode then finishes and it's not connected to anything in any way, shape or form. So it's kind of a good start, but it's just carrying on from where we are in the past. A good story, but after 30 minutes it's done, it's finished, and really you've got nothing to show for it. It'll never connect with the rest of the MCU. Episode 2 is What If Agatha Goes to Hollywood, and this I think is the worst episode of the lot because I was so bored. Like seriously, it's so boring. Agatha basically goes off to Hollywood because she needs to do some kind of spell or a ritual to like obtain the powers of a celestial that's hiding in the middle of the earth. And the only way that she can like capture the powers is to perform a ritual so big that she needs like a whole Hollywood set production in order to do it. And then there's the character from the Eternals that's in there that's kind of like stopping her / helping her. And it's just really boring, and there's a lot of musical numbers and big flashy stuff like this. My problem is that if you're using characters like Agatha and the Eternals, you're really kind of struggling because they're like, well, not Agatha, but certainly the Eternals. Like, I forget that the Eternals is even in the MCU. Like, it's just awful. So the fact that they're like using that in this episode immediately loses my attention. It's just really boring, throwaway, forget about it. It's just a rubbish episode, just really awful. What if the Red Guardian stopped the Winter Soldier? And again, this is just another one that's just like a one-off thing, very throwaway, not connected to anything. It's kind of like a buddy cop show because you have the Red Guardian and the Winter Soldier. Basically, the Red Guardian stops Bucky from assassinating the Starks, which is what we see in Civil War. And then the two of them kind of go off on their own, but they're like fighting for the Russians against the Americans, and then at some point they switch over, and I get really annoyed because the Red Guardian spends so much of his time just shouting. It's like really, really grating after a while. But the story's not too bad, and there's a lot of action in it, and it's a bit of a buddy cop thing, and there's the two of them, and they're on the run and all this kind of stuff. There's some interesting moments in it. There's a really cool car chase that happens in the episode. But by the end, Red Guardian just switches, defects, becomes an American and becomes an Avenger, end of story. And that's literally it. There is nothing else to take away from that episode whatsoever. Episode 4 is called What If Howard the Duck Got Hitched? And I kid you not, the entire basis of the whole episode is that Howard the Duck and Darcy get married and have a baby, well, an egg, and they have to try and look after the egg, which is obviously physically impossible. But I had to write this down because this is a list of everybody that's involved in this. So basically, for whatever reason, and we don't really know why, everybody wants this egg because apparently it's going to create some sort of celestial being. So I wrote this down. They have this egg, which is obviously impossible. The Grand Master tries to steal it originally. The episode is actually connected to the Party Thor episode from season 1. The Grand Master tries to eat the egg. Yondu then steals it from him. He's trying to sell it to the Collector, but accidentally ends up giving it to the bad guy from Doctor Strange, whose name I cannot remember. He's trying to give it to Dormammu. S.H.I.E.L.D., Nick Fury and Agent Coulson and the Skrulls are trying to stop that from happening. Loki then gets involved along with the rest of the Frost Giants. Zeus makes an appearance, which is really, really weird. Then the Dark Elves show up. Then the Children of Thanos. Then Thanos himself. And all of these people are trying to catch this egg, which Darcy has made, which is physically impossible because she was with a duck. I mean, how do you even break that down? I have absolutely no idea. A lot of the... there's a lot of obviously Easter eggs, which is obviously a bit of a pun because the whole thing's about an egg. But it's there was just so much being thrown into this on a storyline, which was just so not difficult to wrap your head around, but just ridiculous. This episode is ridiculous. And there's a lot of humour in it and a lot of funny moments, and there's some terrible singing involved in it. But it's just character after character, and all of these groups after groups after groups, and bad guys after bad guys after bad guys. They just keep showing up, all trying to get this egg. Some people just want to capture it. Some people want to eat it. Other people want to sell it. And it's just going from one extreme to the next. And just all of these really random characters just turning up to get this egg, which eventually nobody gets. Darcy and Howard the Duck get to keep the egg, and eventually the egg hatches, and it just creates a being called Birdie, who later appears in the final couple of episodes, which again is why you could just watch the last couple of episodes. The fact that that character is the daughter of Howard the Duck and Darcy is completely irrelevant. So you could just skip to the final 2. You really don't need to watch this episode, but it's so ludicrous and ridiculous that it's kind of just funny. Episode 4 just gets really way out there, way out there. So it's kind of just stupid really at the end of the day. And other than it just creates this character and a bit of a backstory as to who their parents were, again, completely irrelevant and a total waste of time. Episode 5 is called What If the Emergence Destroyed the Earth? And the Emergence is, again, going back to the Eternals. And again, that means that I'm already struggling with it because I hate the Eternals. It's the worst thing. I say it's the worst thing in the MCU, but I completely forget that it even exists. The story was so bad. I can't even really remember what happens in it other than there being Celestials that one of them has their hand or their head stuck in the middle of the earth or something like that. And it's just, then you're really struggling because you're trying to remember something that I just thought was terrible. But basically what happens is that the Eternals fail to stop the emergence from happening, which is the premise of the movie that they're in. So the emergence still happens, the Celestial kind of rips the Earth apart, it's all destroyed, and it's basically a story about what's left. And in the end, you kind of have like this weird sort of civil war situation, this post-apocalyptic civil war happening on the fragments of the Earth, which seem to be being controlled by something called the Iron Federation, which is basically the Iron Man robots. That are being controlled by Mysterio, of all people, appears as the bad guy in this episode, which was very unexpected. Did not expect to see him in this whatsoever. And they're fighting up against like a resistance, which has got a few random characters in it, and one of which is Riri, who is obviously going to become Ironheart. So it was a little bit kind of weird because we haven't had her movie or show. Is it a movie or a show? I can't remember what she's got, but she's got something coming out. So to a lot of people, she's a complete stranger. It's a really boring episode. There's nothing interesting that happens in this other than at the very end. And this kind of then leads into the end of the series, is that the Watcher actually kind of like gets involved and changes something from happening. And that's kind of what we're building up to as we get to the end of the series. But other than that, everything else that happens in it is, again, relevant, boring, not interesting, characters I'm not interested in watching. Yeah, again, just skip to the final two. You really don't need to see any of these other episodes. That's me being brutally honest, I know. Episode 6 is probably the biggest throwaway of the lot. So this is What If 1872. So in other words, what if the Avengers were happening in 1872? In other words, what if it was happening in the Old West and they were all cowboys? Which is a bit like what happens in season 2, where it's more like a medieval setting. This time we've got a cowboy one, but there's only like 2 characters that appear in this. One is Shang-Chi, and the other one is Kate Bishop as Hawkeye, and they're basically cowboys that are going along and trying to save everybody from a mysterious villain who's called the Hood, whose secret identity is revealed as being Shang-Chi's sister, which is just the biggest anticlimax ever. It's just really boring. It's kind of an okay episode in the sense that the Western setting is sort of cool, but the only thing that's interesting in this and that's relevant is that the Watcher interferes again. So this is the second time that he interferes in the outcome of the episode, and that then gets into a lot of trouble. So as the episode finishes, the Watcher is then basically going to be punished by other Watchers who he had sworn his oath to never interfere. So it's kind of then leading into the finale of the series, if you like. But the actual episode itself in this cowboy setting, I don't like Shang-Chi. I didn't like the movie. Again, we're relying on characters and movies in this franchise that are just like the weakest of the lot. And unfortunately, that then carries on into What If, which just, to me, just makes it really bland and boring. And I don't know why, but I just feel like they're super afraid to kind of use characters that would be really exciting. Like Ghost Rider would have been amazing in that episode because we've got connections from, if you remember the Ghost Rider 2 movie, there is like a Western theme that goes back to with the Ghost Rider character. You could have used that. That would have been absolutely incredible. But it's the same thing with this. There's like missed opportunities. There's no real X-Men characters apart from one who appears later on. There's no Deadpool characters. There's no Daredevil characters. There's no Punisher. When the series finishes in the outward credits, we get images of these characters, like Wolverine and Deadpool, and Daredevil and the Punisher and all this kind of stuff. But they're never actually in the show, and I kind of feel like, why? Why are they so afraid to actually do it? Because that would be cool. Instead, we're going back to Shang-Chi and the Eternals, like the worst movies in the entire franchise. And even Zeus, who comes out of Thor Love and Thunder, which is the worst movie I've ever seen in my life. So, you know, you're not doing yourself any favors with this show, Marvel, by using characters that are just the most boring that you could possibly imagine. Episodes 7 and 8 are kind of connected, and really it's just one big long episode that goes on for about an hour, and it's What If the Watcher disappeared, and then the final episode is called What If, What If. So I'm just going to review them together because it's really just one convoluted story. So it starts off with the Nova Corps being attacked by a giant monster. Weirdly, Nova Prime is Nebula, which I thought was what the episode was going to be about, but no, she's just in it for the first few seconds and then disappears. So again, pointless. And then Peggy Carter turns up to sort of like save the day, along with some other characters. And I wrote this down in big capital letters. One is Birdie, who was the daughter from episode 4 when Darcy marries Howard the Duck and they have a baby / egg. Again, scientifically impossible, but we won't worry about that. So her name is Birdie, so she's in this, and Storm is in this, which is our very first kind of like X-Men character, and the only one that actually appears in this, which is just such a shame. You could put anybody in this show, and they only used one X-Men character. And like, you knew you had Deadpool coming out. You knew that you had Wolverine in that. You knew you had the entire X-Men franchise to call upon, and you use just one character at the very, very end. Why? Why are you so afraid to kind of go there and try and push it? But anyway, we end up with Captain Carter, Storm, and Birdie, and they've also got the hero that comes from season 2, who was literally created just for the series, who was like a Native American superhero, whose name, admittedly, I cannot remember, but she's in this as well. I'd kind of like to see that character in live action, or I had hoped to, because otherwise, what's the point? But again, the whole series, the whole show is what's the point to me. You know, what if it's complete waste of time? And unfortunately it is. But anyway, you get these characters turn up, and they understand that the Watcher has sort of disappeared. He's being punished. They don't know that he's being punished by the rest of the Watchers for interfering with stuff, but they do know that he's disappeared. So they want to try and rescue him, because Captain Carter is this like, kind of like his agent in some ways, and she travels into these different timelines and different alternative dimensions to sort of interfere on his behalf, which obviously the rest of the Watchers don't like. And in the end, actually, they end up capturing both the Watcher and also Peggy Carter, and trapping them, basically going to destroy them in essence. So then it's up to Birdie and Storm and the Native American superhero to sort of rescue them and bring them back. And long story short, in order to do that, they have to use Infinity Vision, who I believe it was season 2 he comes from, of What If, in order to open a door to the 5th dimension so that they can go in and rescue them, which they do, and then it turns into a massive, great big fight between those sort of group of superheroes with the Watcher, and then the other 3 Watchers who are like more powerful and super and all the rest of it, blah blah blah. Infinity Vision doesn't last more than 5 minutes, so again, a bit of a waste of time, but he's there to get them there. And then the final episode is just basically one giant fight, and the way that the superheroes in the end win that fight is that they actually become Watchers themselves. So you end up with Watchers versus Watchers, and it just turns into this epic, great big final battle that happens, which is actually really entertaining. I really enjoyed the final battle that happened in that episode. So this is why I think you could literally just watch episodes 7 and 8. You wouldn't lose anything. You wouldn't fail to understand anything that happens in those episodes, other than just a little reference to Howard the Duck and Darcy being the parents of Birdie. But you don't need to know that. All you know is you've got these random heroes that are fighting on behalf of the Watcher, who they themselves get turned into Watchers to become all powerful, and there's just this massive fight sequence. And again, yeah, the fight sequence is really cool, brilliant animation, great action, good sequences. I like the way that they put it together. And in the end, there's a big sacrifice that happens in order for the whole thing to finish and come to a conclusion. And that conclusion has no impact on the rest of the Marvel Cinematic Universe in any way, shape or form. It means absolutely nothing. So I really go back to one of the review videos that I did all those years ago when season 1 of What If came out. And I said, what if it's completely pointless? We're now three seasons gone, and I think this is the last season, and I'm quite glad because I really don't like it. But ultimately, after 3 seasons, I'm still asking the exact same question. What if it's completely pointless? And now we know. 3 seasons gone, and it is unfortunately just a massive waste of time. Like, you could find some enjoyment in some of the episodes. Like, I really liked the Marvel Zombies episode, for example. But my biggest disappointment with the whole thing is that ultimately, I'd really prefer they do this in live action. Like, I don't mind shows being animated, but I just feel like there's such a missed opportunity to do something. Like, then they're obviously doing a Marvel Zombies spin-off from this, but it would be so much better in live action. It would be grittier and edgier and just better, in my opinion. But that's just my opinion. I feel like this is a show that appeals more to the comic book fans and less to the cinema-going fans. Again, that's just my take, but ultimately, if you're looking for connectivity, because the MCU really, its success that it's had and that Marvel Studios have enjoyed over the years comes from the fact that these stories are all interconnected and overlapping each other in one way or another, because that's what was so groundbreaking about the whole saga and all of these movies, is that they were telling a linear story, and you would get characters, connecting with one another through all of these storylines. But with What If you've never watched it, you wouldn't lose anything. It's no impact whatsoever on anything else that's in there, which is such a shame, because I feel like, yeah, that's just such a missed opportunity where you could have told stories or brought in some really cool characters, and they just failed. I don't particularly like the animation style either. Sometimes I think it's kind of good, sometimes I don't. It relies really heavily on like some very bright neon colours. A lot of the time as well. It's kind of well animated in the sense that it's done very well, but it just, I don't know, it's never hit the mark. I've always found it really disappointing. So yeah, What If? It is unfortunately still completely pointless. It changes absolutely nothing. It has a big finish at the end of it, which then just falls flat because you realise it hasn't impacted on anything whatsoever. And you've probably just wasted a good, what, 6 hours, 8 hours, 6 hours? How long? About half an hour per episode, and there's 8 episodes, whatever the maths is on that. That really you didn't need to bother with. You'd be better off just waiting for the new Captain America movie to come out in a couple of months. So there we go. That's just my take. And I know some people will love it. And if you do leave a comment, let's have a chat about this and actually sort of figure out why is it that I don't like it? Why do other people not like it? But I'm sure there are some that do. So let me know what you think, leave a comment, and we'll get into it. So there we go. That's just my take. And on that terrible disappointment, which it really, really is, it is time to end. So thank you very much for watching. I'll see you guys in the next video. The vlog is over.